a canopy bow. This is always just like, ugh, who wants a canopy bow? No one. No fighter pilot wants a canopy bow.
And 5, clear for takeoff.
Seat tied, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspeed.
Today we're talking about the J-20S, China's latest and greatest 5th generation fighter, the Mighty Dragon. We'll do some comparisons between the F-22 and the F-35 as we take a look at this video that popped up on Oxer, as well as a couple others that I found interesting. I think you will like as well, if you like this aviation and military type stuff. Now, a little bit of background. The J-20S is China's latest and greatest 5th generation stealth fighter. It's now in full-scale production, where reports and analysts are saying they're producing upwards of 250 of these per year. So full-scale production, which I definitely think denotes / takes a country, nation, a air force to the next level when it comes to, hey, we can make cool prototypes, one-offs, but be able to produce these at scale is an entirely different thing all in itself. So full-scale production of the J-20, definitely impressive. Now, nose on, this is going to stir people up. It always does. I think that looks like the Raptor, very close to it. Now, the Raptor doesn't have canards. I know it, so go ahead and scream your comments on your keyboard down below. But to me, it's a good-looking jet. It's slightly bigger than the F-22, about 10 feet longer than the F-22, about the same wingspan. So feeling about the same size, plus or minus, also a little bit taller than the Raptor. Now with that, if we're comparing apples to apples, this one's larger. It carries less weapons internally, carries 4 air-to-air missiles. We have seen it loaded down with air-to-air missiles on pylons externally, which reduces low observability, versus the Raptor with 8 internal missiles, 6 radar-guided, 2 IR-guided missiles. Your fighter having more missiles is definitely a plus. Now, if you can slap 14 missiles on this externally and those missiles have longer legs than your adversary's missiles, then maybe you don't need to be low observable because you can reach out, shoot them before they can shoot you. Again, that's something we can talk about later, but nonetheless, when we talk size-wise, when it comes to internal carry, the Raptor beats out the J-20S. Now, why is that? So, it could be a couple different things, and there's some assumptions here. The original engines on the J-20, no thrust vectoring, and they're AL-31 motors from Russia. China now produces WS-10 and WS-15 motors indigenously, and they utilize those on their J-20. So, their engine production and capability has obviously improved. Maybe with that, you see a variant or a modification with a larger internal payload. So either that space is being consumed by one or a combination of larger engines because the engine technology just wasn't there in order to have small, compact motors that could produce the thrust required for this aircraft with fuel efficiency that it needed, or you needed more space for internal components and avionics, or fuel, or combination of all the above. The J-20 has longer legs when it comes to range than the Raptor, assuming that maybe that space is utilized mostly by fuel. Not a ton of information that's openly available about the motor technology and the capability of the J-20. This is all coming from open source. So those are just some assumptions that, again, there's probably some happy medium or mix in between there of why it only carries 4 internal missiles. But again, engine technology has always been one of those things that's very difficult produce high efficiency, high capable, reliable motors that nations have struggled with. The US has done a pretty good job, I would say, and thus you can use more space for fuel, have smaller planes, more weapons, those type things that really matter when it comes to a fighter. So we'll see what the J-20, how it evolves over the years. Now, I do think this plane does look pretty good. Nose on, it looks like a Raptor to me. I know that's going to make the comments explode and people just yell into their keyboards, but tell me that doesn't look like a Raptor head on if you remove the canards and a couple little changes. I know it's its own plane in its own right, but nonetheless, it has some of those. So again, go ahead and scream into the keyboard and we'll just keep moving forward for everyone else. So with the canards and the tail, we could see the tail here in a minute that it's fully maneuverable. So canards in that, I anticipate that low speed regime, having those with large surface areas would make this plane very maneuverable. Throw in thrust vectoring in the B model and on. Again, it probably is pretty impressive. Looking around the J-20 here, we do see a couple little windows, as well as some just other different colored handling, which again, going out on a limb here, assuming that there are probably some sensors behind this doing various things that, again, feeding information to the pilot. This would be one of those things that would take it to that 5th generation, that next generation, that a 4th generation platform. Might not have design built in, but maybe getting it down the road with modifications and bolt-ons. It does look like a pretty good, clean, sleek looking jet, in my opinion. However, A canopy bow. This is always just like, who wants a canopy bow? No one. No fighter pilot wants a canopy bow. Coming from the F-16, that clear bubble canopy. I mean, it was a day VFR fighter, so lose sight, lose fight. You want to be able to see your adversary. Having a canopy bow is definitely a detractor in my book. Is it a deal breaker? Probably not, especially if you're dealing with really long ranges. But why do we have a canopy bow? Well, if we look at the F-35, it has a canopy bow, and that comes from the F-35B vertical takeoff and landing configuration, where the envelope to safely eject the pilot if there was an engine failure or a loss of thrust, there is not enough time for the entire canopy to jettison, and then the ejection seat go up the rails. So you have to have this det cord. Now, F-35 doesn't quite have this, but it's a similar concept. So this det cord, I would imagine, fractures, canopy blows into a million little pieces, and then the ejection seat, it's going up all at the same time to minimize the time the pilot is in that seat there. So this front windscreen, I'm going to assume, again, that the Chinese, much like us, you're designing that front windscreen out of a thicker material. Same material, but it's going to be thicker, being able to withstand a bird strike at high speed and not enter the cockpit and strike the pilot, causing damage. So that aft transparency is going to be thinner and has that det cord there. Goes the APU firing off, start the engines up. Again, big control surfaces with the rudder vaders, I believe is what we're calling it, and the canards moving. So again, low speed regime, imagine highly maneuverable, especially when you compound that with thrust vectoring. If you go look at an F-16 horizontal stab versus the Raptor horizontal stab, I mean, it's almost the same. The Raptor horizontal stab, it is almost a F-16 wing out there. So a lot of surface area to move air at low speed, making it very maneuverable. We're doing some demo. All these guys lined up, taxiing out together, a couple different planes. Here we can see at the bottom, much like an F-35, one of the parts of the EOT system, the electrical optical targeting system, kind of like the targeting pod you might see mounted on an F-16, an F-15E, or even an F-15C sometimes. I would envision this is part of the camera that's feeding the system there. And if we look around the plane as it's taxiing out, again, we're seeing various points where there could be different sensors doing different things, collecting data, providing that, using that to the pilot. Well, formation takeoff, every fighter pilot's favorite thing to do, really the landing. Deep climb out for formation takeoff, but who am I to judge? These are some demonstration maneuvers. It's tough to tell the maneuverability, in my opinion, when you don't have the horizon line. You can't see how tight things are and how much ground or how much real estate they're consuming when they're making these turns. This one definitely cuts between different ones, but you can see the canards digging in there, little loaded rollouts, meaning still under G as that pilot is rolling out. So not unloading, rolling, being more snappy, more maneuverable there. Very humid, vapey day. It'd be nice to have the horizon line here to see just how maneuverable this J-20 is. Looks like lots of passes. This was from the Zhuhai Air Show, I believe a couple years ago. Oh, that's really loaded. Back that up. Kind of hear that whistle, the engines there. Pretty loaded roll. I don't know if that is intentional or not planned. When you're under G there, you get a lot of loaded asymmetric G. For air shows, that's not really what you want. Doesn't look very clean, doesn't look very crisp. A little slow-mo, like 120 frames per second there. Does look pretty cool. Nice touchdown. Greased it on. Different day, different jet. Got some drag chutes. Again, when I see drag chutes, that's one kind of indication that maybe the brake technology is not quite there. You require a significant amount of extra drag, right? That's just one more thing that has to be maintained, done, that could break, that could fail, versus just relying on brake technology to stop it. Again, maybe someone can make an argument for, we parachutes that saved us 10 pounds of brake pads or something. But again, you see a lot of the drogue chutes being utilized in Russian fighters. Now the F-16 does come with drogue chutes for a lot of our European nations, and that's utilized in emergency situations. In the United States, deployed locations, we do have emergency cables that are utilized for U.S. Air Force fighters. People think that the Navy is the only one that has them, but in emergency situations, U.S. Air Force fighters have hooks that you can put down and catch a cable. And most military bases have a minimum, most fighter bases, I should say, have a minimum of 2 cables, if not 4 per runway. A lot of opportunities should you have some kind of issue, emergency where you need stopping distance. Where our European allies flying the F-16, same thing applies. Their cable infrastructure is not like what we have in the United States. So you would find, hey, in the case of a brake malfunction, degradation, that you could rely upon the chute to stop on a long runway. But if you're utilizing it for normal operations, which appears at least that last J-20 did, not necessarily what you want to do. It could be indicative, again, of a lack of brake technology. So if it lacks brake technology, then I do question other technological capabilities. Again, overall, I mean, it is impressive to see just the sheer volume and the production rate that the Chinese been able to do with the J-20. It's not something to scoff. We've obviously seen it flying around with 12 PL-15 missiles, which, according to open source, is a pretty robust missile. So if you got a missile truck back there, you can make this thing a pretty effective fighting tool, let alone if you do get in close, it does appear maneuverable, despite all the loaded rolling that they were doing in these videos. Maybe they just captured the worst ones. But nonetheless, pretty cool plane. Let me know what you think.